Thank you for staying with us and welcome back to the Global Town Hall 2025. Without further ado, to lead today's climate-focused session, please welcome Distinguished Professor of Practice at Georgetown University and the London School of Economics, Sir Andrew Steer. The floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here. My camera's not working, I regret, but that doesn't mean I'm not here. I'm here enthusiastically. Good evening to you in Jakarta. Good morning to those of us in the Western Hemisphere, and good day to everybody else. The last week has been extremely important. Many of us have been in Belém in Brazil for the COP30, and we just heard from Anatoni, who's the executive director of COP30, just how urgent things are. We stand at a pivot point in history. We're losing the battle against climate change and against nature loss. But on the other hand, there are amazing opportunities out there and amazing signs of hope. So we live in a world where we have to embrace both deep concern about the future, but also a hope that things could be done differently. This session is going to focus on how can we work together? How can we have that east-west, north-south kind of relationship? Fascinating over the last few days how the COP has on the one hand, been mired in some quite difficult negotiations. Indeed, just the day before yesterday, the president of the COP decided just to take a session together, not to talk about anything in particular on a technical level, but rather to talk about how to build trust. Today is a very important day in Belém. It's a time when they take stock, and it's going to be very important that a trusting atmosphere takes place. It's going to be very important that they're honest with each other about who can do what to help solve the problem. We have a wonderful panel here and some great discussants from all around the world. Some of them are here in Belém, others are not. I want to start off with turning to South Asia, although I know that our speaker is actually in Belém for the COP30, Anuradha Ghosh, who's president of the Council on Energy, Environment and Water, and special envoy for South Asia for COP30. Anuradha, I wonder if you would sort of paint the scene for us, particularly from a South Asian perspective.
Thank you, Andrew. Good morning. Bon dia from Belém. Namaskar from South Asia. I'm Anuradha Ghosh. I'm the CEO of the Council on Energy, Environment and Water. It's an independent think tank headquartered in New Delhi. We work across India and in some other parts of the world as well. And this year I'm serving as special envoy for South Asia. I want to just pick up on where Andrew left off on the issue of trust. I think the question before all of us is what will inject trust in the system? And for me, and I guess for the COP president as well, at least in the way he's articulated it over many months, it is going to be action and implementation. I think at the core of our concerns around climate is not so much about whether we need to act, but how we act and how we act together. I was reflecting on this yesterday, thinking about how has the world changed between 2015 and 2025. Most significantly, of course, it has changed meteorologically. I remember just a few weeks before COP, the COP in Paris, we had a once in a 100-year flooding event in Chennai in southern India. But just weeks leading up to and days leading up to COP30 here in Belém, we see devastating hurricanes that have destroyed economies in the Caribbean, not too far from here. The climate crisis is a lived reality now. It is no longer an anticipated reality. And it's become a lived reality much sooner than had been anticipated. Now, it has changed meteorologically, but the world has also changed politically. And it has changed politically of course, in obvious ways, where the largest historical polluter has exited the Paris Agreement. But it has also changed politically because there are many other countries that have taken climate action and undertaken climate action at scale, including my country, India, where between 2015 and now, when we had less than 2 gigawatts of solar at that time, we have over 120 gigawatts of solar, over 250 gigawatts of non-fossil electricity capacity, the fourth largest renewables market in the world already. We hope to, I think, if we deployed all the capacity that we intend to, we hope to then generate well over 40% of electricity from clean sources by 2030 alone. But we see that change happening in other parts of the world as well, whether it's in Southeast Asia, whether it's in Sub-Saharan Africa, whether it's in South America, various large numbers of developing countries that now have larger shares of clean energy in their mix than for many advanced economies. So that is another shift. I guess the biggest shift is the sociological shift. The climate crisis is now a macroeconomic crisis, but it's also a social crisis. And it's a social crisis because it is exacerbating the inequalities that we've been grappling with in any case in our societies. It is exacerbating the feeling of both helplessness and yet enabling communities to take charge. So the question before us, from the point of view of trust, is how do we inject trust in a system that is getting buffeted by meteorological changes, having to handle or come to terms with political shifts, and yet being able to respond in a just manner to the social shifts. And in those regards, I want to maybe put forward just a few ideas. I think we need to get very serious, number one, about the overshoot and what that would mean, especially for developing countries and emerging markets. If we have reached 1.5, if we are not close to 2, of course, we made progress over the last 10 years from shifting the trajectory from well over 3 to now between 2.3 to 2.5. But what does that overshoot mean? It can't be, as I said a couple of days earlier, a number just stated with stoic insensitivity. That lived reality is going to shift fundamentally, and I think it's extremely important that emerging markets and developing economies take charge of considering the hyperlocal impacts on their countries, on their provinces, on their cities, in their neighborhoods of what an overshoot would mean. The second thing we need to do is actually, and as was being mentioned by Anatoni in her opening remarks, see what is it that we can do to accelerate the energy transition that is already underway. And this, I believe, is not just a finance story. Of course, it's a finance story, but it is not just a finance story. It is a policy design story. It is an institutional design story. It is a market design story. It is a governance story. And I really hope we learn from each other a little bit on those fronts. And finally, I realize my time is up. On the social side, I think it will be extremely patronizing on our part to think we can treat the communities on behalf of whom we seek to speak as the objects of our good intentions. We have to create the conditions where communities become the subjects and the enablers of their own destinies. And that requires a very different shift in how we govern, not just climate action, but our economies overall. Let me pause there. Happy to come back.
Great. Thank you so much, Anurabha. That was a terrific opening. We're really grateful to you Let me say each of the speakers, we're going to ask to speak for just 3 minutes, and then hopefully, then we're going to have some discussants and hopefully a little bit of conversation. Again, my apologies that my camera seems to be broken, so I will try and talk little so you'll see people with beautiful faces whilst you can't see me. Let's turn now to Kumi Naidu, who has been a great fighter for justice over many years and is well known internationally. He's currently a president of the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. Kumi, as you look at this, are you hopeful? Are you discouraged? What should we do?
Thank you, Andrew. I think it's important to start with this point, that in the moment of history that we find ourselves in, pessimism is a luxury we simply cannot afford. And the pessimism that justifiably emerges from our analysis, our observations, and our lived experiences can, must, and should be responded to by the optimism of our thought, our action, our creativity, our courage, our innovation, and our sense of humanity. Friends, having said that, when we talk about the climate crisis, we often get lost in the language of parts per million and gigawatts. But beneath all that is something much more raw, a crisis of power, a crisis of justice, and let's say it plainly, we are not in this mess because humanity is stupid. We are in it because a small number of powerful interests have treated our planet like a casino, and our people are collateral damage. Even today, with all the good news about renewable energy breaking records, fossil fuel still makes up 80% of the global energy mix. Put differently, 86% of what drives the causes of climate change is our dependence and addiction to oil, coal, and gas, what we call fossil fuels. It's not because renewables can't meet our needs, they can, but because political courage hasn't caught up with technological progress, because the fossil fuel industry has had its knee on the neck of democracy for decades, buying politicians the way some people buy groceries. So what will it take to break that power? First, we must stop pretending we can negotiate with science and physics. We must stop the expansion of coal, oil, and gas and manage a fair, fast, and funded phase out from fossil fuels. That is exactly why we are fighting together with a range of governments from the global south, including 3 fossil fuel exporting countries, that's Colombia, Pakistan, and Timor-Leste, for a binding treaty. One of the problems that we've had over the last 30 years is that the COP resolutions, sadly, do not have legal weight and teeth. So we need something to complement the Paris Agreement, and in that is where I see hope that, in fact, next year in April, we will have Colombia host a fossil fuel phase-out diplomatic conference. So we welcome President Lula's statement that we need a fossil fuel phase-out plan. Let's hope that we have to turn off the tap on climate change. We cannot continue just mopping up the floor. If we do not turn off the tap on what is 86% of the problem, we're kidding ourselves that we are actually making change. And therefore, what much as we need to be hopeful, it needs to be informed hope. It needs to be a hope that's rooted in the fact that we have not done what we need to do. Where we are now is that we are not aligned with the science, but hope and optimism is what we need for us to move forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed, Kumi, and we are deeply grateful for the work you've done over many decades. And certainly in Belém this week, there were a lot of protests, a lot of recognition that actually the fossil fuel industry was there in some force to lobby against the kind of thing you're arguing for. And indeed, some protests that were joyful but strong, trying to make sure that the kind of justice you're talking about prevails. Let's turn to Kevin now, Kevin Jianjun Tu, Managing Director. To you, Kevin.
Thank you very much, Andrew, for this opportunity. Given the high temperature in the conference room in Berlin, please excuse my intentional choice to wear a t-shirt instead of a business suit. I am speaking to you as a Chinese energy and climate expert, and I'd like to offer a perspective structured around three themes: China at a crossroads, the power of innovation, and China's role as a hybrid superpower in bridging global divides. Let's start with China at a crossroads. For decades, China's economic prosperity was driven by three key dividends, but it is now reaching its limit. First, the demographic dividend, a once young, growing workforce that is now aging and shrinking. Second is the confidence dividend, the widespread expectation of a better tomorrow that fueled Chinese investment and economic growth. An optimism now tempered by slower growth and new uncertainty. Third is the globalization dividend, China's deep integration with the world economy, which is powered export-led growth. Today, geopolitical rivalry and shifting supply chain mean the country cannot rely on unfettered globalization as before. In short, China stands at a crossroads. The old growth engine are losing steam, and the choice the country may take will determine whether it will follow a more sustainable development path. Then let's examine AI and deep tech, new drivers for a sustainable future. One promising path forward is through innovation, especially leveraging artificial intelligence and advanced technology to transform the energy and economic system. We are witnessing how AI, digitalization, and deep technological breakthrough are reshaping what is possible in climate strategy. In China, AI is beginning to optimize energy use in real time, but meanwhile, how to minimize negative consequences of AI is still an open question. Critically, the technologies pioneered by China should continue to be shared globally in a transparent, open source manner, benefiting both the climate and economies worldwide. Third, China as a hybrid superpower, a bridge between the North and South. To conclude, the climate future we need will be built by all regions acting together. China stands at an inflection point. We must transform our economy for the new era, harnessing innovation to drive a greener prosperity, and the international community should recognize the joint responsibility to help forge the global alliance that can deliver climate security for everyone. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Kevin. Indeed, we're grateful for your words, and certainly in Belém at COP30 this week, each country, many countries have pavilions, and the Chinese pavilion is one of the liveliest. A whole series of seminars going on there from people coming from all over the world to talk about what role China can play, because obviously China is both the biggest polluter at the moment, but also by far, by an overwhelming amount, the leader on renewable energy and green technology. I should say also that another one of the most exciting pavilions is the Indonesian pavilion, where, again, just a whole series of activities going on and deals being done, but lots of seminars, lots of discussion this week on issues of nature, and the relationship between Indonesia and the forests and that incredibly important Southeast Asia part of the world, and the Amazon, of course, which is where Belém is actually situated, was very, very exciting. Let's turn to our next speaker, Lola Vallejo. She is Director of Diplomacy at the European Climate Foundation. Lola, over to you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. I would like to maybe share a few remarks coming from Europe, because obviously in the current context, all eyes are on Europe to show a de facto leadership of developed countries. And I think also taking a step back on what can Europe's contribution be to the world, and also echoing Arunaba's words earlier on, to restore trust, we need to bring credibility and implementation. I think Europe has, a track record of cutting emissions so far of about 37% since 1990, all the while growing the economy by 71%. And I think that's a very important message in the current context, same as China has, in a way, invested in strategic sectors to lift, its population out of poverty, and really grow its economy. I think Europe has a good story to tell. It's largely on track to meet its current target to reduce emissions by at least 55% by 2030. And although a bit late and just in time for COP, there has been a new NDC adopted by Europe to come forward at this COP. It's a range from 66 to 72% by 2035. But I think looking beyond that, what's really important is that this international commitment is rooted in a stronger and somehow clearer commitment to reduce emissions by 90% by 2040. So I've been throwing a lot of numbers, but I guess my message is Europe is staying the course, and despite real internal difficulties, which I think are also interesting to look at and better understand, there has been a political consensus to stay the course and to continue aligning climate action as a major political project in Europe. Because climate action, especially now for Europe, is not about just environmental issues, and it's mostly, I would add, about an industrial project. And that's why the new Green Deal is called a Clean Industrial Deal, because it's about competitiveness, and it's about staying in the race, where China has a huge lead right now on clean technologies. So it's becoming about energy security, industrial competitiveness, just as much, if not more, than just environmental issues, all the while being also affected by the climate impacts that, again, Arunaba insisted on. And Europe is one of the hardest hit continents, just in terms of absolute emission increases. Temperature increase. The thing that I think Europe can bring is not just, looking back, but also looking at the policies implemented. And it's been 20 years that Europe has had an emission trading scheme in place. And I guess carbon pricing is a key part of Europe's soft power in terms of moving on with policy implementation. So we hope that maybe this can also form the basis of some interesting discussions. And I know that China, Brazil, and Europe have started already these discussions and thinking of a broader coalition on these issues.
Thank you very much, indeed, Lola. I mean, what a fascinating time for Europe it is. And just in the last week, we've seen both the best of Europe, where you came out with an NDC, which actually was deeply impressive. And then just 2 or 3 days ago, the European Parliament voted down a piece of legislation that was a really important one. And there was a massive disappointment, a terrible effect actually on the mood in Belém, that is Europe succumbing to the same kind of populism that has taken over in the United States. And of course, many of us who have been in this space before, we've seen very exciting coalitions, both in Paris and then again in the Glasgow COP. We saw relationship between the United States and China at the last moment, really helping to bring a deal. And the question is, what are the kinds of partnerships now? And obviously, India and China, Europe, Brazil, wonderful to see the leadership of Brazil right now. Let's turn to our discussants to share some thoughts on these issues. Let's turn first to Joanna Kay, Director of the Superpower Institute. Over to you, Joanna. Is Joanna there on the line? Maybe then let's turn to Mulima Nyambe Mubonga from Zambia, the Institute for Policy Analysis and Research, ZIPAR. Over to you.
Thank you. And thank you to the speakers. You provided a good context for us to discuss how we should rebuild trust and global solidarity. So I'll start by saying, the legacy issues of the historical injustices and broken promises around climate finance and technology transfer continue to erode the trust between the North, Southeast, and West cooperation. Coupled with these are the geopolitical tensions and economic rivalries that often undermine these cooperative efforts that we are trying to make. Now, we must begin by firstly recognizing and respecting the diverse climate realities, as one of the speakers mentioned. In resolving some of these climate actions, there's no one size that fits all. For the developing countries, I'll give an example of Zambia. Sometimes we have the North trying to advise us in a good way to say you can use this model, but it's important to ensure that we contextualize as much as possible. But then how do we do this? The climate financing, technical assistance, and technology transfer are critical to help us in this regard. We have little or no capacities to address some of these climatic events, and indeed, the cooperation at scale will be critical to ensure that we are on the same page and we build a global solidarity or alliance rather. So we also think that it's good to ensure transparent climate governance and coordination, not just at the global, but also at regional and national levels. I always say that it's important to integrate some of these governance issues and coordination around climate change to the national domain planning processes. And if we take the COP, some of the things that are agreed need to be domesticated. And I think one of the speakers said it's important to have legislation around these aspects. So it's important to ensure that we rebuild the trust globally by visibility and early wins from partnership delivery through predictable finance flows, visible community impact, and clear regional coordination. Without these, the rhetoric of a grand alliance will remain hollow. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mulima, for that those important thoughts. Let's turn to Christine Jodleman now, Executive Director of the Agria Foundation. Over to you, Christine.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and to our speakers. A few weeks ago, the Philippines was stormed by two sequential and devastating typhoons, Typhoon Kalmegi and Typhoon Fungwong, a super typhoon. Hundreds of lives were lost, millions of people affected and displaced, billions of pesos washed out. The Philippines experienced 20 to 21 typhoons every year, and it's getting stronger, more destructive, all exacerbated by climate change. And vulnerable sectors are always hit the hardest, as what our first speaker said, it's a social crisis. I will focus my reflection on climate finance. How can climate vulnerable countries like the Philippines have equitable access to climate finance? How do we build the capacity of the climate vulnerable populations to be more resilient? How can the youth take part and participate in planning a future we want, one that is more resilient? It is essential to prioritize climate and disaster risk finance and insurance to ensure that climate finance becomes accessible to vulnerable groups, especially the vulnerable workforce like farmers and fisher folks. Strengthening early warning systems and anticipatory action will also be critical in enhancing disaster preparedness and enabling more effective responses to the climate crisis. When designed well, climate and disaster risk finance and insurance mechanisms can transform higher risk ventures into opportunities by reducing exposure to climate hazards, managing residual risks, and mobilizing private capital for resilient development. Youth can play a vital role in climate and disaster resilience by helping strengthen early warning systems and supporting community preparedness efforts. My question to the speakers, how can we ensure accountability to climate polluters vis-a-vis balancing access to climate finance of vulnerable countries? That's all. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Christine. Let's hold these questions that are coming from the discussants, and we'll have a final round of the speakers at the end. I hope we'll have time for that. Thank you again, Christine. By the way, I should say that Philippines is regarded as leading in many areas at the moment on climate policy, particularly in adaptation. I was at an event just 2 days ago in Belém, and someone said, "Give an example of a country that's doing exciting things." And the one of the speakers, first thing they said was, "So you're doing a great job there. Your voice is extremely important." Let's turn to Sergio Chaparro, the International Coordinator of Justicia. And maybe you might just tell us a word, Sergio. I should have asked each of you. You might want to say just one sentence as to what your organization is really working on.
Sure, thank you so much. Hi everyone from wherever the world you are joining us. My name is Sergio Chaparro and I work at the Justicia, Colombian human rights organization, focused on fighting inequality, advancing human rights across different areas. And we are gathering in a moment where the accelerating climate emergency has exposed a truth we can no longer ignore, and it's that the international financial architecture is fundamentally misaligned with the transformation our planet urgently needs. Countries that want to lead, like Colombia and many others, are constrained not by lack of ambition sometimes, but by global rules that punish climate action instead of enabling it. So, first of all, the debt crisis is directly undermining climate action. Today, 3.3 billion people live in countries where interest payments on external debt exceed public investment in health or education. When governments are forced to divert the scarce resources to service debt, they cannot invest in adaptation, renewable energy, resilient infrastructure, or social protection. Many low and middle income countries now pay 4 to 8 times more to borrow than wealthy nations when trying to rebuild after climate disasters they did not cause. No just transition is possible without faster, deeper, and fairer debt restructuring, and without ending the cycle where climate vulnerability leads to even higher borrowing costs. Second, climate action is impossible without fair and effective international tax rules. A recent assessment shows that 2.6 trillion in urgently needed tax revenue could be raised every year if countries applied a modest 1.7 to 3.5% wealth tax on the richest 0.5% of households, and if governments recovered the corporate tax losses through profit shifting into tax havens. These resources could fund renewable grids, forest protection, public transport, and universal social protection without increasing the debt or inequality. This is why advancing a UN Framework Convention on International Tax Cooperation is essential. It gives all countries, not just a few, a voice in designing fair, universal rules to finance the climate transition. These measures should be clear from Belém to Nairobi. And finally, we must move away from investor-state dispute settlement systems that reward fossil fuel companies and penalize climate action. Under current investment treaties, governments fulfilling their Paris Agreement commitments may be liable for up to 340 billion in future claims from oil and gas corporations. This creates a profound regulatory chill. It means that if a country phase out coal, stops granting new oil permits, or protect ecosystems, it might be sued for billions to the very industries perpetuating the climate crisis. No state can pursue an ambitious transition while operating under the threat of financial retaliation for doing the right thing. What we need is clear. Debt rules that put human well-being and climate resilience first, tax cooperation that allows countries to mobilize the public revenue needed for transformation, and investment rules that protect climate policy, not fossil fuel profits, as well as genuine policy space for willing countries to carry out a just transition. Reforming international financial architecture is not optional. It's the only way to align global finance with the goals of the Paris Agreement and with climate action in general. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sergio. You were raising some extremely important issues, and your point about the cost of finance is so central. I think it's probably the most important and most difficult issue to address, which is why is it that countries that need funding so much should have to pay such a higher interest rate than those that need it less? And some recent research, which was discussed in Belém, COP30, shows just how unfair it is. It turns out that countries that are most affected by climate change, those in particular that suffer extreme weather events, they then become less creditworthy. And so they pay even more. So first they get hit by climate change, which they didn't cause, and then they have to pay more to borrow because there's a risk premium because those countries are more risky. And it's I think both you and Kumi and others are raising just such incredibly important issues of justice, which must stand at the center of what we're trying to do here. Let's turn to Bengisu Ozenk, who's director of the Sustainable Economics and Finance Association.
Thank you, Sir Andrew, for the introduction, and I'd like to also thank previous speakers for their valuable insights. As SEFIA, Sustainable Economics and Finance Association, we are supporting Turkey's transition to low-carbon economy, ensuring accelerated energy transition and ambitious climate targets by providing economic and financial insights to inform policies. I would like to say a few words on the rising importance of South-South cooperation and North-South cooperation with regards to climate action in the current state of the world. So previous speakers also mentioned how the climate action is losing its momentum, particularly in the core economies where climate goals are overshadowed by geopolitical tensions, security-driven and competitiveness-focused policies and reactionary populist narratives. So in this period, the role of global South countries becomes even more critical in keeping ambition and targets alive. And maintaining the determination, the ambition in this geography is possible by remembering once again how climate and development policies reinforce each other, and by embedding this relationship more firmly within the mainstream policy framework. In fact, we should recall the notion of co-benefits, which was our starting point in mainstreaming efforts in Turkey. Climate action not only brings us closer to climate targets, it also brings us closer to a more prosperous and more equitable world in both the short and long term. It's possible through climate policies to achieve an economic development model that is resilient, where higher value-added production increases and decent employment opportunities expand and benefits are shared fairly. It is also necessary to discuss this type of economic development approach in special terms, giving more focus to the fossil fuel-dependent regions. Ensuring a sincere and long-term support from the global north for such transformation in Global South reveals another kind of co-benefit, actually. Such cooperation can both enable the financing and technology transfer needed by the South for its double goal of transformation and development, and allow the North, in an environment of rising competitiveness, to develop new and more secure supply chains. Through joint production platforms developed within an industrializing South, it becomes possible to create benefits that support both competitiveness and the transition. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Bengisu. How terrific to see you. You know, as you look, you listen to all these people. I mean, it's a wonderful thing that we can bring people together from, whether it's Philippines and East Asia and China and East Asia, or India, Europe, Africa, Latin America, Colombia, and so on. How blessed we are. And I would want to say thank you to the foreign policy community in Indonesia, the FPCI, to Global Citizen, for this amazing global town hall. We have a little bit of time left, and what I'd like to do, and again, my apologies that you can't see me. There's something wrong with my my camera, but actually it's very early in the morning now, and you probably wouldn't want to see me anyway. I actually flew overnight to a different part of Brazil and didn't get into bed till 3, and so I had to get up at 5:30. So you wouldn't want to see me anyway, but I do apologize for that. Let's just take one final round. I'd like to go back to the speakers to see if there's anything that you have heard that you'd like to comment on, and maybe we'll go in reverse order here. Lola, anything from you you'd like to say?
Thanks a lot. I think I would just like to echo what many have said about the importance of joint partnerships and finance, including from Europe, playing a major role. I think clearly in the challenging geopolitical context that we're in, it takes the determination of hope to continue crafting those partnerships, but I think we have no other choice. And definitely, I think that there are some useful conversations happening in Belém, including how do we target more funding specifically for adaptation, which I think needs to receive more airtime and is starting to become pushed. But also, as Sergio has said, we can find definitely sources and there are solutions, including, the European Climate Foundation hosts the Secretariat for the Solidarity Levies Task Force, and it's one of the options that is basically around taxing polluting activities in a way that generates concessional finance that is debt-free. So just encouraging and supporting other messages that there are solutions, and we need to bring courage to these discussions to meet the challenge of the day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lola. Kevin, anything from you?
I would add a little bit further detail about the third bonus I just mentioned. China as a hybrid superpower, a bridge between North and South. The third theme is China's unique global role. China could be categorized as the world's first hybrid superpower, a major country that is both a global leader and in some aspects still developing. China has the economic heft and the technological capacity of an advanced nation, yet we also remember the journey of development and the challenges still facing the Chinese people. This dual identity gives China a foot in both the global North and the global South. It means China is uniquely positioned to act as a bridge in the grand climate alliance we need to build. China understands the development aspiration and energy needs of emerging economies because the country has the capacity to share them. At the same time, China has collaborated with industry countries. Going forward, China can help connect this world. So for further detail, please see my paper published with the Center on Global Policy at Columbia University. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed. Could we come back to sort of the fundamental issue as we turn now to Kumi and Anuraba? This is a time when we need real bold action. Do you feel that there is any prospect right now? We are obviously in a time of incredible political complexity. Multilateralism is under huge threat. And do you feel that a time of crisis provides an opportunity of doing things that actually seemed impossible before? Or do you think that it makes it just much more difficult? Let's turn to you, Kumi, because you've been in this space so long. Are you weary, or are you feeling maybe there is an opportunity now?
Thank you, Andrew, for this important question. The Chinese taught us a long time ago that the same character for crisis is the same character for opportunity, right? And so the challenge for us is, how do we firstly not kid ourselves that we are not in the place that we need to be? We can tell no lies and claim no easy victories if we are going to come up with the real solutions to a very difficult reality that humanity finds itself in. So, in this COP, for example, we keep talking about keeping things below 1.5, and nobody is willing to say loud and clearly that we are actually almost at 1.5 already, right? There's a bit of a cognitive dissonance and a denial of reality about where the conversation is. Secondly, Andrew, I was very pleased that you pointed out the fact that the over presence here of the fossil fuel industry. Just for those of you who didn't see the statistic, a report came out yesterday saying that for every 25 delegates, there's one person from the fossil fuel industry. So you're talking about in excess of thousands, couple hundred. That's as absurd as Alcoholics Anonymous holding a global conference, and the largest delegation to the conference is the alcoholic industry. Because what it is we are trying to do here is to get off our addiction to the fossil fuels. Now, we do not, Archbishop Desmond Tutu used to say, "I'm not an optimist, I'm a prisoner of hope." And I think we don't have any option but to be hopeful. And where are the hopeful signs right now? So the one thing is, we are seeing countries, as Sergio pointed out, like Colombia, small island states in the Pacific and the Caribbean and so on, saying we need to step forward and we need to not let the lack of delivery often seen at COPs hold us back. So I just want to close on that point of multilateralism that Andrew mentioned is under threat. Sometimes the best way, to respond to a crisis, they say attack is the best form of defense. And therefore, some of you might have questions. Well, how is it in this moment of multilateralism being attacked? Can we be talking about a new legal instrument like a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty? So let me just take you through this, because this is a little bit of an optimistic vision that we have, right? So firstly, in April next year, we will have a first international diplomatic conference on the phase out of fossil fuels. We hope to take into that conference a strong statement, at least out of this COP, which recognizes an agreement, a broad agreement that we have to phase out and phase out as fast as possible. Secondly, we then need to start the conversations around what might that treaty look like. Given what we right now know, right, there should not be any more fresh investments in new fossil fuel projects. It just doesn't make sense. It's just pouring fuel on the fire. And so the treaty would try to get an agreement that no new fresh resources into fossil fuel investment. The second then is to figure out what would be a sensible, fast though, and fair and funded phase out. And the good news is that even in countries like the United States, where at the national level we have climate denialism. What we see is the states of California, Hawaii, and Maine, for example, have endorsed the treaty. About 30 cities have done so. And we are seeing cities and subnational governments around the world, whether the national governments on board or not, are pushing for movement in this direction. We are seeing a level of civil society support for this that's unprecedented. We're seeing the faith community actively involved and so on. So at the end of the day, we cannot change the science. All we can change is political will. And political will, thankfully, is a renewable resource in the sense that we can vote people out of power or generate political pressure. I just want to end with saying that, there have been at least two very important signs recently. And the world's highest court, the ICJ, tackling the world's biggest problem, climate change, ruled very strongly that governments can be held accountable for failing to address the phase out from fossil fuels, that fossil fuel companies can be held accountable and so on. And bear in mind that even before this ICJ ruling, we were winning court cases in many jurisdictions around the world, both in the global north and global south. This ICJ ruling, I predict, will give us a bit more traction in the courts, and hopefully the courts become quite an important site of struggle in pushing things forward. The second is the IUCN, the world's largest multi-stakeholder body, just a couple of weeks ago, adopted resolutions, both supporting the idea of ecocide, as well as supporting the idea for a fossil fuel phase out, and 80% of governments at that forum voted in favor of the fossil fuel treaty and a fossil fuel phase out. So while there is momentum, I think we have to be telling ourselves people are losing their lives now on a massive scale. We are seeing infrastructure being lost now on a massive scale. So this is not a time for slapping ourselves on the back and saying how great we are doing. Starting point has to be, we are not where we need to be, but human ingenuity, creativity, innovation, and so on can turn things around. And we need to create much, much more space for non-state actors, civil society, faith institutions, trade unions, and so on, to also be part of working with governments who not yet have the political will to act with the urgency that the situation calls for in partnership. Otherwise, if pressure from below and also pressure that's now needs to be turbocharged with intersectionality, we should not present climate change as something that is about the environment. Climate change is a cross-cutting issue. It's about our economy, it's about our energy system, our food system, our transport system, and so on. And we need to ensure that we're framing climate change in a more people-centric way if we are to move things forward. The last thing I would say is another reason that we have been failing, which we need to address, is that we have been aiming all our discourses to the brain, and we've ignored the heart, the body, and the soul. We cannot move people. We cannot move people on the scale that we need to move them if we try to bring them on board simply by explaining the science or policy prescriptions and so on. We have for far too long relied on a lot of jargon, which most people cannot understand. Even 1.5 people don't understand what we're talking about. And therefore, we need to harness the power of arts and culture, what some of us call artivism, to help us reach ordinary people on the scale that we need to. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kumi. And a wonderful point to sort of think about as we approach the end of this is yes, we need our heads, don't we? But if we don't have our hearts, people respond based upon what they believe. They respond based upon the extent to which they love each other and they love nature, that we love each other and we love nature. And I think that's incredibly important. And it's actually a wonderful thing I've been to now, I'm embarrassed to say, I think 17 COPs in climate. It's really wonderful to see how actually these issues of emotion and heart are increasingly coming in there. And at times like these need big ideas, and you certainly have one. Kumi. Just one point worth mentioning, I think you talked about the United States, and obviously that to some extent is the missing elephant from the room in Belém. There is no US delegation officially there. But it's worth pointing out, actually, that the US is still very active. Why? Because the Constitution of the United States actually gives a lot of delegated authority to states and cities. And there are 23 states out of 50 in the United States that are totally committed to climate action. And if you add those states together, they account for 55% of the population of America and 65% of the GDP of America. And many of those governors were present and their staff were present. So we shouldn't give up yet on the United States. But what we should really do is look for sort of new partnerships, and maybe you could end things, Anuraba. I heard you say 3 days ago in a speech you were giving at a dinner. You said, I believe, that if you go back 300 years and you added the economy of China and India, it would account for roughly half the world's total GDP. And you were predicting that as we move forward, that may happen again. And so we got different power alliances in terms of the economy in the new world. Do you think that sort of deals, partnerships, coalitions between the India's, the China, Indonesia, Brazil, South Africa, etc. Do you feel there's an opportunity then inviting in Europe? Do you feel there's any prospect for a sort of unexpected set of political coalitions now? And maybe then you could please just take if you could just take 3 minutes maximum.
Thank you, Andrew. And first of all, my thanks to everyone here who's offered very not just sober analysis, but also inspiring ideas. I think some of the ideas that came up on adaptation finance and on global taxation and reform of public finance, those are the kinds of things that we have to certainly consider, whether we are advanced economies or developing countries. But I wanted to make just 2 points, one in response to what you said, Andrew, and one in response to what Kumi was saying. I think there is no question that this is a matter of the head and the heart and the spirit. We at CEW, we produced India's Solar Anthem, which was released by the Renewables Energy Minister last year. We created the first Art and Climate Fellowship, which will have its 3rd edition this year. I think it's incredibly important that we reach out to people and communities in many different ways. But to your point, Andrew, and to many of the other questions that have come up over what kind of partnerships, I think they already exist in some ways. I was intimately involved in designing and creating the International Solar Alliance, which was a North-South bridge. It was 10 years ago. India and France kicked it off. There's well over 100 member countries now. There is a Biofuels Alliance. There's a Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. There's a huge swathe of new initiatives, which we can call the coalitions of the doing, that are underway. And increasingly, I would urge that we look at South-South not as a feel-good point, but as something that is driven by our own lived realities and our interests in thinking about the overshoot, in thinking about response to near-term risks to our infrastructure and to our economic prospects, to thinking about reforms in international organizations or creating entirely new organizations that are more inclusive and representative. All that is possible. Creating new sectoral coalitions, say around steel, or on aviation fuels, or around adaptation. But I want to close by saying that we need to look beyond the climate story to draw inspiration. The entire Green Revolution was driven by South-South and North-South technological collaboration, but also by partnerships that cut across our boundaries, laboratories situated across our countries, etc., that enabled us to do these things at scale. Just a few years ago, when the pandemic happened, we had a laboratory in Oxford working, we had a factory in India working, collaborating, and creating billions of vaccines. And then India offered 300 million doses of those vaccines to low-income countries, often well before all Indians were vaccinated. Uh, Solidarity is a noun in the dictionary, but solidarity has to be a verb in climate action.
Wonderful.
And that is, I hope we can draw on that to build new partnerships. Thank you.
Look, that's a wonderful way to end. Like to thank this incredible panel. I mean, it's just so great to see all your faces on the screen from literally all over the world. And again, I'm sorry you can't see my face, but that's my problem. I would like to thank the organizers of this remarkable event. The Global Town Hall has become a sort of almost a symbol of how you pull people together from around the world, and it's led from this wonderful group in Indonesia. And I should say some of the very happiest times of my life was the 2 times I lived in Indonesia. And what an incredible leadership role you are playing. And I'd like to thank my good friend Dino Jalal, who is sort of the leader of this entire enterprise. I knew him well when he was deputy foreign minister, and then he became the most influential foreign ambassador in Washington, D.C., where he led the Indonesian delegation. So to all my friends in Indonesia, thank you for all you're doing, pulling us together. So we have to end promptly. We now have 30 seconds left of our allotted time. I thought that was a truly brilliant conversation. So grateful to all of you. And as they would say in Indonesia, terima kasih banyak and sampai jumpa lagi. Thank you.
Terima kasih banyak, and thank you, Sir Andrew Steer, for moderating. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to the session on Winning Humanity's Greatest Battle, Building a Strategic North-South, East-West Grand Alliance for the Climate Future We Need. Up next is the session titled SOS World Leaders. Can we refocus, realign, and reprioritize world affairs for sustainable development? Please stay tuned as it will begin in just a few minutes.